It's the summer of 1967. A rifleman kneels in the red dirt outside a firebase north of Saigon, and before he moves out on patrol, he does something that would look insane to anyone who wasn't there. He tears open a small paper wrapper, pulls out a tampon, and tapes it to the stock of his M16. Then he tapes a second one next to it. A new guy watches him do it and doesn't say anything, because he's already seen half the platoon do the exact same thing. Nobody explains it. Nobody has to. The rifle in that soldier's hands has already killed Americans by jamming at the worst possible moment, and the cotton he just strapped to it is about to do two jobs the United States Army never issued it to do. One of those jobs is keeping the rifle firing. The other is keeping him alive long enough to use it. Today we're going inside one of the strangest and most useful pieces of unofficial gear carried in Vietnam. It was a drugstore product designed for something else entirely, and in the field it ended up cleaning rifles, packing wounds, starting fires, filtering water, and shutting out the noise of a firefight. The tampon was not a joke to the men who carried it, whatever it sounds like now. It was a tool, and like almost every tool that actually kept men alive over there, it didn't come down through supply. It came up from the soldiers. And to understand why a grown man would tape one to his weapon before walking into the bush, you have to start with the weapon. Because in 1966 and 1967, the M16 was not a rifle American soldiers trusted. It was a rifle that got them killed. The M16 arrived in Vietnam carried by a promise. It was light, it was accurate, it fired a small, fast round that tumbled on impact, and the men who designed it built it around a specific propellant and a specific set of maintenance assumptions. Somewhere between the drawing board and the jungle, those assumptions broke. Soldiers were told the rifle was low maintenance. Some were told, in so many words, that it was self-cleaning. And because of that, early batches went out to line units without proper cleaning kits and without anybody drilling into the men how often the thing actually needed to be scrubbed. Then the Army changed the ammunition. The powder Eugene Stoner designed the rifle to run on was swapped for a cheaper ball powder that burned dirtier, left more residue in the action, and pushed the rifle's cyclic rate higher than it was meant to go. Dirtier powder, faster cycling, no cleaning gear, and no chrome lining in the chamber to resist corrosion. Every one of those decisions was small on its own. Stacked together, they turned a good rifle into a rifle that stopped firing when its owner needed it most. The failure they feared had a name: failure to extract. A round would fire, and the spent brass case would swell and stick inside a fouled chamber instead of ejecting. The extractor would tear straight over the rim of the case and leave it jammed in the breech, and now the rifle was dead. You couldn't just rack it and keep shooting. You had to take a cleaning rod, shove it down the muzzle from the front, and physically knock the stuck case back out of the chamber before the weapon would work again. Try to picture doing that with people shooting at you. Now, picture doing it in the dark, in the mud, with your hands shaking. After the fighting in the Ia Drang Valley and other actions across 1966 and 1967, there were reports of American dead found beside their rifles, with the weapons broken open, cleaning rods in hand, killed in the middle of trying to clear a jam that never should have happened. It was bad enough that Congress opened an investigation, and the subcommittee that looked into it laid the blame on the powder change and the maintenance failures and the false confidence the men had been sold. The Army eventually fixed the rifle. The improved version got a chrome-lined chamber and bore that resisted the fouling. The buffer was changed to bring the cyclic rate back down, and cleaning kits finally reached the men who needed them. There was even a maintenance manual drawn up in comic book style with a wisecracking illustrated spokeswoman, because the Army had figured out that men would actually read a comic and clean their rifles if you made the instructions memorable. But fixes take time, and time is exactly what a soldier on a jungle trail did not have. While the institution worked through its procurement problem, the men lived with the rifle they had. And the one thing that rifle demanded, constantly and without mercy, was to be kept clean. That is the first job the cotton did. A tampon is nothing but tightly compressed cotton with a string on one end, sealed in a wrapper that keeps it clean until you open it. Cotton is what you clean a rifle bore with. The official cleaning patch is a small square of cotton flannel you wrap around a rod and push through the barrel to wipe out powder residue and carbon. When the patches ran short, and they always ran short, the cotton from a tampon did the same work. A man could tear it, wrap it on his cleaning rod, and swab the chamber and the bore, the exact places where the fouling was killing his rifle. The cotton pulled the carbon out. It soaked up the oil. It was clean when it came out of the wrapper, and it was already the right material for the job. And unlike a paper patch, it held together when it was wet, which mattered in a country where everything you owned was wet most of the time. So the first reason to tape a couple of tampons to your stock was almost boring in its logic. It was cleaning supply for a rifle that would jam and get you killed if you didn't clean it, kept dry in its wrapper, riding right there on the weapon it was meant to serve. The second job is the one everybody remembers, and it's the one the story tends to exaggerate. So, let's be straight about it. A tampon is built to absorb blood. That is the entire design brief. It's compressed cotton that expands several times its packed size the moment it gets wet. It comes individually sealed, so it's reasonably clean. It's small enough to disappear into a pocket, and it has a string on the end. To a man looking at a narrow puncture wound, a piece of shrapnel through the meat of the arm, a small caliber round that went in clean, that is a field dressing that fits the hole. You unwrap it, you pack it into the wound, the cotton swells against the walls of the wound channel, and it soaks up blood while pressing outward at the same time. For the right kind of injury, it worked, and men used it. Now, the honest part. The story you have probably heard is that soldiers plugged bullet wounds with tampons and it saved their lives, and that story is true in one sense and false in another. It is true that men improvised with them because they were there and they were better than a bare hand. It is false that a wad of cotton the size of your thumb was ever going to hold back a serious bleed. A tampon absorbs a small amount of blood, and a man with a torn artery loses far more than that, far faster than any cotton can soak it up. It was never a miracle, and the medics knew it. What it actually did was buy a few seconds and a little pressure on a small wound, and on some days, a few seconds was the difference between a man who made it to the dust-off and a man who didn't. That's not a legend. That's just what a desperate, resourceful person does with the tools in front of him. The tampon didn't save lives by being magic. It saved a few by being there, and being there is most of the battle when the aid station is a helicopter ride away. There were smaller medical uses that get less attention and worked better than the dramatic one. A nosebleed that won't quit in a man who has to stay quiet on an ambush is a real problem. And a tampon is the same thing the packing a doctor would use, just bought at a drugstore. A small puncture that's oozing rather than pumping can be packed and left, freeing a man's hands to keep moving. Under a proper pressure dressing, the cotton adds absorbency and bulk that a thin bandage doesn't have on its own. None of that is heroic, and all of it is useful. And useful is what keeps a patrol functioning when it's 3 days from anything resembling a hospital. Then there is fire. And this is where the tampon earns its reputation as a survival item that has nothing to do with medicine at all. Vietnam is a wet country. Rain, humidity, rivers, swamps, ground that never fully dries. Starting a fire in a place like that is genuinely hard, because everything you'd want to burn is damp, and the hardest part of any fire is not the flame. It's the first ember catching hold on something dry enough to sustain it. Cotton is one of the best natural tinders there is. Pull the cotton from a tampon, tease it apart so it's fluffy and full of air, and it will catch a spark off a flint, a lighter, a match, almost instantly, and it burns long enough and hot enough to dry out and light the damp twigs you feed it next. The cardboard applicator burns too, for a downed pilot trying to signal or stay warm. For a recon team that needs heat without a lot of smoke. That dry, sealed cotton was a fire in a wrapper, waiting. A man who couldn't get a fire going could be a man who died of exposure or couldn't purify his water, and the cotton solved that in a way that a soaked book of matches never could. Water was the next problem the cotton quietly helped with. The water in the delta and the jungle was not water you drank as it came. It was full of silt, mud, algae, and things you did not want to think about. And on top of the sediment, it carried the bacteria and parasites that put more men in the hospital than some firefights did. Soldiers were issued iodine tablets to kill the microorganisms, but iodine works best in water that isn't cloudy, and cloudy was the only kind of water on offer. Cotton pulled from a tampon, packed into the neck of a canteen or a funnel, made a rough filter that strained out the mud and the grit and the floating debris. So the water going into the canteen was at least clear. Be clear about what that did and didn't do. The cotton took out the dirt you could see. It did nothing to the bacteria you couldn't. That was the tablet's job, and the clearer water let the tablet do it. Together, a scrap of cotton and a chemical tab turned swamp water into something a man could drink without spending the next week too sick to fight. There was even a use for the cotton in the simplest emergency of all, which was noise. A firefight is deafening in a way that's hard to describe to anyone who hasn't stood next to a rifle going off. Sustained close-range gunfire does permanent damage to hearing, and a lot of Vietnam veterans carry that damage to this day because ear protection in the field was an afterthought when it existed at all. A pinch of cotton in each ear was not going to save a man's hearing entirely, but it took the sharp edge off the worst of the concussion. And it was there in a pocket when nothing issued was. It's a small thing. Most of what kept men functional over there was small things. You could pad a hot spot in a boot with it before it turned into a blister that crippled you on a long march. You could wipe down a weapon, a wound, a face, a lens. The cotton was clean, absorbent, compact, cheap, sealed against the wet, and completely disposable, which in a country that destroyed everything you carried made it close to the perfect field material. It just happened to come from the drugstore aisle nobody talked about. So bring it back to the rifle and the tape, because that's the image we started with, and now it makes sense. Think about the two things a man in a firefight needs faster than anything else. He needs his weapon to keep working, and if he's hit, he needs to stop the bleeding before it stops him. Both of those needs are measured in seconds, the same brutal arithmetic that ran through everything in that war. A jam you can't clear in time kills you. A bleed you can't slow in time kills you. And a man who taped a couple of tampons to the stock of his M16 had put the answer to both of those problems in the one place he could always reach it. One-handed, in the dark, without taking his eyes off the tree line. Cotton to keep the chamber clean so the rifle didn't jam. Cotton to pack a wound if it did him no good and he got hit anyway. Not in his ruck, not in a pouch he'd have to dig through while his hands shook, but strapped to the weapon that was never going to leave his grip. It wasn't superstition, and it wasn't a gag. It was a man doing the math on his own survival and taping the answer where he could grab it. What ties all of this together is the same thing that ties together every one of these field improvisations from Vietnam. The army had a supply system, and the supply system was built for a war the men weren't fighting on a timeline that didn't care how fast they were dying. The official answer to a jamming rifle was a redesign that took years. The official answer to a wound was an aid station that might be a long, loud helicopter ride away. The official answer to wet tinder and dirty water and ruined hearing was, for a long stretch of that war, nothing at all. So the men found their own answers, and they passed them soldier to soldier, And a lot of those answers came in a care package from a mother or a girlfriend back home who had no idea her son was going to tape her drugstore purchase to a rifle and carry it into a swamp. The cotton didn't care what it was designed for. It only cared that it worked, and it worked at almost everything. The cotton cleaned the chamber so the rifle would fire. The cotton packed the small wounds and bought the seconds that sometimes mattered. The cotton caught the spark when everything else was soaked. The cotton cleared the mud out of the water so the tablet could finish the job. The cotton took the edge off the noise that stole men's hearing. One small sealed piece of a soldier's kit, meant for none of it, quietly doing all of it, because the man who carried it was smarter and more desperate than the system that failed to equip him. If you served over there and you carried these, or you watched a buddy pack a wound or start a fire with one, or you had a use for them that never made it into any manual, put it in the comments. The official record of what the army issued is written down and easy to find. The real record of what the men actually used to stay alive lives in the memories of the people who were there, and it deserves to be written down with just as much care. And the next time you hear the word tampon and think it's the punchline to something, think instead about a 19-year-old in the mud outside a firebase, taping 2 of them to a rifle he couldn't trust, doing quiet, clever, life-saving engineering with $1's worth of cotton, because the country that sent him there couldn't manage to do it for him. If you want more of the history that never made it into the manuals, the stuff that's too strange and too human to end up in a textbook, go ahead and subscribe. It's the honest way to tell YouTube to bring the next one of these to you, and it helps the people who'd actually want to find this find it. A like does the same thing and costs you a second. And if you're not done yet, there's another one already up on your screen right now. YouTube put it there because it fits. So go ahead and let it play. To the men who figured all of this out in the field, one improvised solution at a time, this one was for you.